Welcome, everybody. We're live with Mike here on KMOX, and it's a pleasure to have a chance to visit with the two leaders of our professional sports in St. Louis, Doug Armstrong of the St. Louis Blues. President of Operations, Hockey Operations is a safe title?
That's a safe title.
All right, and John Mozeliak, also with the same title with the St. Louis Cardinals. Gentlemen, we did this a few years ago. A lot of things have changed since we first had a chance to sit down and chat this way. So I want to ask you about how you got to this point, because you guys went to school and got an education, played a little sports, and like all of us, once we realize our athletic ability can't take us to another level, you want to stay close to the game. So how did you guys arrive to the position? Because you don't go to college to be a president of operations for a sports team.
Why don't you go first, Doug?
Okay. Well, I grew up in hockey. My father was in the NHL. He was an official for 25 years.
Hall of Fame
official, and then scouted for the Montreal Canadiens for 25 years. So hockey's always been in my blood and in my life. I realized, as you said, at an early age, I wasn't good enough to get into the NHL, so I went the school route, got a business degree, started to work in Minnesota for the Minnesota North Stars. I'll remember this like it was yesterday. Bob Clark was the manager then. He said, your father got you the job, but your father won't keep the job for you. So that was the indication that I better roll up my sleeves and get to work. And been fortunate to be at the right place at the right time a number of years, and things have worked out. Started out obviously at entry level in hockey operations, learning the business. Became assistant to the GM, and then assistant general manager, then general manager, and that's how we got to where we are today.
Mo, you had a little bit of a different path.
I did, and for me, I had no family connection to the game of baseball. I always played it, loved the game, but never envisioned working in it or having a career in it. Upon finishing school, I started working with the Colorado Rockies, and at the time they were an expansion team, and as you all could imagine, the infrastructure of a team like that is very limited. And so got exposure to do a lot of things, and my background was more in database management, and so at the time of statistics becoming more important and really just sort of information management, that really opened the door for me. And subsequently, Walt Jocketty, when he was named the general manager of the Cardinals, he brought me with him from the Rockies. And at that point, I was named the assistant scouting director for the Cardinals and really got a lot of exposure to the baseball side of the business. And ultimately, for me, I just spent about 2 or 3 years doing nothing but listening. And whatever was asked of me, I would try to do it. But ultimately, I tried to pay attention and really try to understand how I could make Walt or Tony or others make smarter decisions or better decisions in terms of getting to the right answer. And so at an early age, I realized I might actually have a career in this business. I didn't, again, set out to do that. But, for me being named scouting director at 28, all of a sudden I realized I could do this. And subsequently had some early successes because I was blessed with being lucky enough to be a part of the Pujols draft or the Yadier Molina draft. And so I think people then became more confident in how we were approaching things and how we were doing things, and subsequently was eventually named general manager, and then my current position now. But it's been a very exciting ride. I mean, the business has changed so much since I first broke in, and I think part of understanding success is the ability to change and evolve with it. And, when you look at how we do things, and it's no different in the hockey business, is you have to create that pipeline. You have to have the talent coming. And, yesterday I read that the Blues minor league system is ranked 3rd overall. Probably the greatest pride I have in baseball was in 2011 when our minor league system was ranked 1 and we won the World Series. And so when you can be achieving both, it's really a place you want to be. But without having a minor league system that's highly regarded by third parties, you're probably never going to get to where you need to go.
For both you guys, you've done a lot of jobs to get to where you're at now. What was the one that you got the most out of, and what was the one that you say to yourself today, man, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore?
I could start on that. I think we would both probably look at first getting our foot in the door, because I think Doug's point is, my father may have helped me get the job, but your dad's not going to let you keep the job, right? So doors open, but doors don't stay open unless you do it and do it well. And for me, I think back to my early years in Colorado or my early years with the Cardinals, and getting exposure to learn about the business at all different levels. my hours when I started with the Cardinals would be I'd come in at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and I wouldn't leave till 8 or 9 because there was always something to do. Today, I feel like the industry, we've become way too siloed. In other words, like if you work in the scouting department, you work in the scouting department. If you work in player development, you work in player development. You help the major league team, you work on the major league side. Whereas when I was starting out, I worked in every department, and it was sort of exciting to do that. Now, would I want to go back and do that today? No, but I don't regret it, and actually my memories of it are quite fond.
I would piggyback off of that. My first 4 or 5 years in Minnesota were probably my most enjoyable. A lot like Mo said, I did a lot of listening, a lot of learning. Being around Hall of Fame people, Bob Clark and Bob Gainey were my mentors. Bob Clark was the manager, Bob Gainey the coach. And then at that time, you could do the dual role. Bob Gainey became coach and manager, which opened up so many opportunities for someone trying to learn and get ahead. And I really enjoyed those days, and as Mo said, you put in long hours, but you were working more with people than in a cubicle or in an office by yourself, and I really enjoyed that. At that time, you got to learn the marketing side, the business side, because there had to be some type of relationship on what was good for the players and trying to sell the game, but also keeping the integrity of the sport together. And it's gotten so much bigger now, but I learned so much in those first 4 or 5 years that really set the foundation to where we are today. And as far as things, there's really nothing in my job I don't like to do, and I'm very fortunate when I do back the car to the driver every day. It doesn't. You got to pinch yourself if you're really not going to work.
You have a good time with it.
It's a great time. There's I don't want to call it stress, but there's emotion that goes with our jobs, and but being tied to wins and losses, there's nothing better in life for me than being tied to that.
The job today comes with a number of challenges. You're dealing with payroll, you're managing people, injuries, player development, media, and of course, the social media has really come into play a lot more. And I move that also into family, because social media now touches family, friends along the way. How much of a challenge has that been for you, and how do you deal with it at this stage? Because everybody knows you guys around town. And I'm sure your kids have seen things that are said about you that maybe aren't true. Team isn't playing well, they blame Mo. Team didn't do the power play as well as they needed to, they blame Army. So how do you try and put all that together and along with your day job of managing the other responsibilities?
Well, social media is the one thing that has changed the most probably over the last decade. And you're right, family plays a big part in that. I actually read social media, but I don't take it personal. Sometimes you get a little tidbit of information you might find in there that's useful. But when people are calling for your scalp, then you make one good trade and they want to do a parade. So it fluctuates and it goes up and down. But my wife does read social media and she takes it personal. And that's the one area I keep saying to her, if you're going to take it personal, don't read it, because it's not meant to be personal. And the other thing, too, the way that I look at it, if our fans weren't so connected, we wouldn't have these jobs. You want your fan base to be passionate. You want them to not live and die, but be vested to that level where they go out of their way to go to a keyboard and say whatever they say, positive or negative. So I look at a little bit of positive that with social media, you are connecting with your fan base and you know that it's out there and it's passionate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, overall my view on this is more of, I think the most discontent type of fan tends to be more of the minority of how you think about what you're reading or hearing. I certainly don't use that as my compass for decision making, but to Doug's point, I mean, sometimes you do read something that actually makes sense. And how I keep my family sort of somewhat protected on this is my wife, if she starts reading it, I just tell her stop because it's not helpful. My daughter doesn't seem to have any interest in it, and my son, I think probably given his age, being an 8th grader, hears a little bit more than probably most, but I've always told him, like, don't worry about it. Like, team's fine. We'll be all right. Yeah. I mean, these are first world problems. We'll solve them somehow, but don't worry about it. And, I do think, the era when you say, like, we didn't even have to think about this 10 years ago is true. I remember, like, when I first started out, the big part of the business was people that were blogging or going into these chat rooms that were just killing you. and now that just does, it's just different. It's much more accessible and much more easy to do. But I don't feel it's like something that has, slowed me down in how I think about things.
Let's talk about players and how you acquire them. What comes with the most risk? Is it free agency? Is it the draft and developing players, or is it the trade?
Well, I would say for us it's free agency in the sense that it's the age of free agency. If you get a player at in our league, if you after 7 years pro, you can become a free agent. So if you start at 18, 25, that's not too bad. But if you are in a contract and become a free agent at 31, you still see serviceable years there, but it's the term. It's trying to go out to the end of the term and believe that you're going to have, it's a declining asset, but how much is it going to decline? There's certainly more risk with our players in their 30s. The metrics show that's a declining asset, and there's the odd player that can fight Father Time, but it catches up to everybody all the time. But the part I think we really enjoy is the drafting and developing, because you're working with 18, 19-year-old. They're pliable. I have a belief in coaching, and I share this with Mike Yo, is the players from 18 to 24 are the guys that really want to be coached, and the guys 30 and beyond really want to be coached because they want to get in the league or stay in the league. It's the guys 24 to 30 that don't want to be coached. That's the job of the head coaches to get those guys figured out.
John, for you, what do you find to be the most
What do you
challenging?
think my biggest challenge is?
I would think free agency would be.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely it. And I think the answer really for all of us is because your players. Mm-hmm. If you draft a player, you develop that player, and they come up with you know what you have. The one of the things about free agency, and I don't care how good your scouts are, I don't care how deep your due diligence is, there's still that unknown of how they're going to fit into your clubhouse. And I've never made a free agent sign without thinking I'm doing great due diligence and talking to people that know the player, talking to people how they think they'll fit in our clubhouse. But it's still far from perfect. And I think when you're really looking at sort of like what's your stomach for risk, free agency is the highest risk. Now, that doesn't mean either one of us can ignore it. We still have to be active in that, because sometimes your pipeline cannot provide you what you're looking for. But I think that's a tough decision for us. I think trades to some level are a little less risky, because you're typically trading for someone that might have just a year left on their contract, or maybe a year and a half. So the fit doesn't have to be as perfect. Whereas in our business, when you're doing a 4, 5, or even up to a 10-year contract, if it doesn't work, it can be an anchor in the wrong direction. And so it's one of those things that I think that we're always trying to battle and understand what's our tolerance for risk.
You ever look at a guy that you watch play for another team and you like him, and now all of a sudden he's available, and then you say to yourself, I wonder why he's available. And maybe it doesn't have anything to do with salary. It doesn't have anything to do with the guy that's behind him that doesn't cost as much money. You ever take that into account on why this good player is all of a sudden available, and then when you get him, you say, oh, now I know.
Well, I think you're always, as Mo said, trying to do your due diligence. Mm-hmm. You want to find out why. Sometimes it's just the nature of where the team is. The player is in the prime of his career, and the team is in a rebuild. And you can't blame, at that point he wants to go to a team that may be pushing in a different direction. So I think you want to do your due diligence. And one of the things that was just said was, I truly believe in player trades. You better know what you're giving up, because you really don't know what you're getting. And I think that's in free agency, and that's in anything. So there's always some risk involved going outside your organization. But one of the things, too, the reason we go into free agency is it might be a good fit for a year or two, but it allows our younger players to develop at a proper rate. I'm not sure in baseball it works like this, but in hockey, I think we fail more players by putting them in the league too early than fail us when they get there. If you put a player in a position to fail at 19, 20, 21, likely they're going to fail. If you overbake them in the minor leagues at 21, 22, they're likely going to have a good 10-year career. So what we try and do through free agency is to buy time when necessary for our younger players to develop.
I do think the free agent market's much different, though, hockey versus baseball, because you look at the dollar spent in Major League free agency and the length of contracts. So I do think in how we think about investing is a little bit more challenging in the baseball world, just because of the commitment that's typically required for the star type player. And as we look to put our club together every year, we are trying to avoid having to go down that path, because it's just a very tough one to negotiate. And I think it was a very interesting point you brought up, Doug, about understanding what you have versus what you don't. And nothing's worse than if you end up trading someone and then they end up being a superstar. So don't make that mistake in our business.
I'll just share a quick story on that. When I was in Dallas, Mr. Hicks owned the Dallas Stars and owned the Texas Rangers, and they went into the free agent market and got A-Rod. And then just talk the amount of money in baseball. He went to sell the hockey team 2 years later, and someone said, "What's he want for the team?" And he said, "I think he wants A-Rod type money."
Well, another funny story about hockey versus baseball, when we were negotiating the Pujols contract, it was that morning before he signed with Anaheim, and I woke up and the Blues had just sold. And they also acquired the Peabody Center. And I'm like, huh. And it was for roughly, 120 or 100. And I joked with DeWitt, I go, maybe we should just buy a hockey team.
John, you touched on something when you first got in the business. You were kind of an information guy, and information has continued to grow, and analytics has a huge footprint in how sports is now viewed. Doug, you're a guy that came up in a different light, but you also have to embrace analytics. How difficult is it for you guys to now instill upon how important analytics will be to your staff and to your coaches and in some cases to your players?
Well, let me ask you this. If you got in your car and you had a flat tire, would you want to change the tire or just drive with it flat?
I'll call AAA.
Okay, that's a solution. My point is you're going to want 4 tires. Mm-hmm. And so when Doug or myself makes decisions, we want to have the best tools to make decisions. And as the Cardinals have been very much on the forefront of the analytical world, we feel it allowed us to make smarter decisions than 29 other teams. So from an industry standpoint, we're always looking for that competitive advantage, and how do we stay in front of that? The analytical world is no longer something that we look to as an advantage for us. Now, there's nuances that we continue to work on, and there's some new technologies out there that we can start capturing things at a different pace than what we were doing a year or two ago. But for the most part, there's 30 teams, and for the most part, they think a lot alike. So there's going to be other things that we have to start diving into or investing in for that competitive advantage. And for me, it's been something that I embraced from day one, because again, I can only tell you what I think of a player, and that's a very subjective opinion. Mm-hmm. And I've never been one that had so much confidence in my, quote, scouting skills to say I'm right and the numbers are wrong. So I think understanding how to blend them and weigh them is really sort of the trick or the nuance. So, a lot of times you'll hear like part art, part science. That's how we think about it.
I would say analytics are interesting in hockey because of the puck movement. When I look at baseball, from the pitcher to the catcher, that whole play could take 1 second. And if it's not hit, you start again. When it's hit, it could take 8 seconds, 6 seconds, and then they start again. In hockey, it's much more fluid. So we're trying to find out how analytics can be part of what we're trying to do. The 3 top possession teams last year all missed the playoffs by a large margin. So there's trying to find in hockey how analytics work. But as Mo said, I believe in our sport, when you're doing well in that, you have to change, because people look at the Cardinals when they're winning championships and say, what are they doing? And they copy you. So if you just stay the same, they're going to catch you. So it's always trying to stay one step ahead, trying to stay creative. And I agree with analytics. In probably all sports now, it's like marketing. Everybody does it. It's like ticket sales. Everybody does it. It's trying to find nuances that make you a little bit better.
You're out of business if you're not doing it.
Yeah, you're watching somebody else do what you should have been doing. Mm-hmm. You guys share a lot of things as far as your careers. You guys have both been part of championship teams and organizations. You were both assistant managers. You replaced good people that were champions. But you also share the common fact that you had to fire a friend, a person that you knew before he was your manager or your coach. How difficult was it? because, this is a business where it's about results. And no matter how much you have a friendship or a relationship with an individual, you still have to get results. And sometimes it's not totally their fault.
Well, I'll start with letting Ken go. And ironically, it wasn't that difficult because our friendship was so strong. You understand you're in a business, but the business is going to come and go, and I'm going to be out of the business and hopefully still alive a lot longer after, and Ken's always going to be my friend. If our friendship was just based on me hiring him and it was going to end, we weren't really that good of friends. I enjoy working with friends, and I think when you go in understanding the sport, the business side of the sport, you have to make hard decisions. He respects our hard decisions, and then he wanted to go to Dallas and prove Dallas right and me wrong. And if they had won the championship, I'd still be his friend. So I think that, true friendship lasts past this, and we're blessed to have good friends.
And I would echo that it is a business. I think, look, it was no secret that things weren't going well in our organization at the time. I guess you could have boiled it down to either he goes or I go, right? I mean, if you're looking for just some version of change. But, I remember telling Mr. Matheny early on that this relationship will probably end in divorce, because guess what? They always do. It's very few of us in this industry go out on our own terms. And if you do, you're an outlier and you're lucky. And, I definitely thought it was a hard decision in the sense of having to articulate and tell him. But in the end, I knew it was the right decision because things had to be done differently.
What's the toughest parting of the ways with a player that you had to make?
I always found there's about a 12-hour gap or 24-hour gap after you trade a player before you meet the new player. That to me is always the gray area. Mm-hmm. You feel bad. Once I lose the empathy of a guy not going to a new team, but a wife moving, kids moving. Our sport's a little bit different where they live in this city during the school year. So you've disrupted everything. And there's that 12 hour till you meet the new guy. And once you meet the new guy, you sort of feel like it's okay. Mm-hmm. But I find trading players is something that I don't take lightly. Sometimes you have to make trades and you have to make changes, but I always try and understand the effect it's going to have on the people to make sure it's doing the right thing and not something that's a snap decision to placate people for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, actually, my answer is going to be quite different than this one because I don't really get all that emotional when we're trading a major league player because I know they're probably going someplace that's going to be good for them and good for their career. Otherwise, we wouldn't be trading them. I also feel like the toughest decisions for me are when you're releasing a minor league player. And you may ask why, but there you're basically telling them their career's over and they never achieved their dream. And I mean, there have been on occasion where I've sat the young man down, talked to them, and end up crying with them because I know that I can only imagine what's going through their mind, the finality of being told it's over. And sort of to my point I said earlier, when you're not leaving on your terms, a career continues. A release is totally different. And releasing a major league player to me can be difficult, but again, they're making real money. They're probably going to have a nest egg or be much more comfortable. But a minor league player, that end can be brutal.
What about when you have a minor league player and you see that he has other skill sets that he may be able to continue to apply to the game? Do you ever pull a guy off and say, hey, look, I don't know if you can continue to play this game, but I think there's a place for you in the game?
Well, sure. And like, I'm sorry to jump in here, but like obviously when you look at majority of our staff, mm-hmm. they have some connection to the Cardinals. And if they had any playing career at all, then we look to hire them in terms of if we think they have the skills and ability to coach or scout. That's certainly not our only pipeline to those career paths, but certainly we'll welcome that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have a player, Chris Butler, St. Louis native, still playing for us in our American League team and comes up on call-ups, but he's a character person that we want to have teaching our younger players what it means to be a pro, helping them reach their goals. And it takes a special person to want to help someone knowing that when the phone rings, they've done such a good job, they're going to take him over you. But and the hockey world is fortunate to have a lot of Chris Butlers, people that care more about themselves. And those are the type of people you want in your organization long term. And Barrett Jackman is another example of someone like that I have a ton of respect for, that did some development work for us. And I think when you find those special people, it makes it easy to see a vision for them on how they can help your franchise moving forward.
You know, one of the things about the games today, they're all on TV. The camera's always on the manager or the player. Now they focus sometimes on the president of the team. How emotional do you get during the games, and how many times have you just been so upset with the performance and the players that you want to show emotion because you're really pissed off, but you know the camera's on you?
Are you allowed to say that on radio?
At least once.
Oh, boy. I don't really get emotional. Now, baseball's 162 games. So hockey, I could imagine that you're ramped up a little bit more per game, whereas I could see in the NFL, one game's equivalent to 10 in our business. So, for me, I've there's so many ups and downs in a season. I think, trying to ride that wave, I would just be exhausted. So I've never thrown anything. I don't swear. I don't yell at anyone. And Mike, you've been around me.
But you have a look, though. There have been some nights you and I have passed each other after a game.
I mean, when you lose a game, you're not going to come down and you're not smiling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're down, but that doesn't mean I'm angry or upset. I mean, I've sat with general managers in the past when I've been working where things have been thrown. And, for me, I always felt like having my employees up there in the suite, I don't want them to feel uncomfortable either. I just don't want them to be on eggshells, oh, how's he going to react tonight? And, clearly the last year and a half or two, there've been some nights that you might have gotten mad. And so, for me, it's just been, I've been lucky because we've had a lot of success, and so the ups and downs have been pretty minimal.
Yeah, I wish I could have Ron Caron here right now to answer that question for you. It'd be a lot more interesting than the answer I'm going to give. You try and keep a level view of things, but I do get emotional. I try and do it. There's certain buildings where like when you're playing in Canada, the TV's on you all the time, so you're a little bit different. There's certain areas in the buildings and in some of the cities where you can be a little more emotional when something good or bad happens. It's even when good things happen, you don't want to give the fist pump and yell and scream, but it's an emotional.
You can do it the last game you win of the season. You can always do it on that, right?
Well,
that's if you make the playoffs and you win the last game of the year.
There you go. How do you guys unwind? I mean, the game consumes a lot of your life. You also have a family, and you also have me time, I'm sure. So how do you get away from the game, and when you've done all your family commitments, what do you guys like to do?
I like to golf. As much as I like to hit golf balls. I like to go to the range. It's therapeutic. I don't got to chase the bad ones, which I really enjoy.
Good strategy.
And that's how I like to get away. I'm a little bit of a loner in that sense. I can go golf by myself and just walk around or hit golf balls. So that's one of the things I like to do. And now that I'm an empty nester, my wife and I do a lot of things. We go to more movies now than I've seen in my whole life. And really, that's the enjoyable part of having kids now out of the house and finishing up their college is we're sort of dating again and reconnecting. And that's a great part of life.
Yeah, I wish I could say that.
You're just getting started with the whole college thing,
right? And I think for me, it's haven't really had that sort of window to find that true hobby or place to relax. And part of it is because, our off season is in the winter, and it just makes it a little bit trickier on a gray day in January to go hit golf balls. Mm-hmm. So it's that part's a little unfortunate. But for me right now, I think I grab a book or just spending time at home is something that I welcome. And I think eventually as things in my career either change pace at some point, then I'd love to be more active on a golf course or be able to spend just more time with my family at some point.
You guys have colleagues in this industry. How many of them are your real friends? And do you have counterparts in other sports you reach out to from time to time?
Interesting question. Baseball is pretty unique. There's 30 of us, so the fraternity is pretty small, and there hasn't been that much turnover in the last decade where you don't know people. And so I think for from that standpoint, there are guys that I speak to probably more than others, but it's still competitive. I mean, like you're not like, hey, I've got an idea for you to help you get to your playoffs. It's none of that. It's we meet once a year at GM meetings that it's a little bit more social, but for the most part, it's cordial, polite, but I would not say like I'm vacationing with anybody. Mm-hmm. And then with regard to other sports, there are teams that have sort of tapped into us more, that try to look at best business practices. And, I've sort of enjoyed that interaction because when I have it, I tend to ask probably more questions than they are, but I feel like that's our advantage. And just sort of understanding how teams think about problem solving and dealing with their issues. And so losing the NFL, I think, was a little bit of it was tougher for us because with our city, it was nice to have the Blues, have an NFL club, and of course the Cardinals, where really you have three different models, three different ways of looking at things, but the crossover was probably more active than you would have thought.
Yeah, I would say I probably have 4 or 5 really close friends that are managers. Again, those are the guys that came into the league when I did in like 1990, and so we've grown up together. We've gone assistant managers together, and stayed in the business. So there's 3 or 4 guys like that, and I don't have a lot of associates outside of hockey, but I like to read a lot of books about successful franchises. A great book was by the former manager of the Packers, The Packer Way. I thought it was a fantastic book. It gave me a lot of insight. The other area where I really try and tap into is my international experience working with Hockey Canada and Team Canada, how they put their teams together, what's important to that entity, hockey's a big deal in Canada, and
I've heard that. Yeah,
and they have a certain way they want to be perceived, and to work in a couple of Olympics and things like that to learn. I brought a lot of what they do as far as their organization skills and how they treat people and how they do certain things, not on the ice but off the ice, that we try and bring into our group here.
You guys run the organizations of your respective teams. The one challenge that we all have is how to deal with that phone call that's 1 o'clock in the morning, because nothing ever good happens from that. How many times have you had it, and what was the most difficult phone call you've had to take?
I have had it, as you know. I'd say probably the hardest one was Josh Hancock, because anytime you lose an active player to a fatal injury or accident is just depressing. I mean, it's just hard. And we talk about finality in sports, but, death is a totally different subject and one that we don't deal with very often. But there's a rule I have for the Cardinals, and nothing good happens after midnight. So, I beg people just to be home. And when you do get that phone call late or middle of the night, it tends to be where people made that mistake. And so that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I haven't had to deal with the gravity of what the Cardinals had to deal with recently, and knock on wood, I never will. But you do get those phone calls, and my first immediate response is, how can I help the person I'm getting the phone call? Let's make sure they're taken care of in whatever situation it is, whether it's a mistake they've made or a car accident or whatever, making sure all the pieces are in place. Obviously, you have an action plan that you call, like when the call comes in, the action plan starts. Who do you call? Make sure everyone's aware, and then helping them out. And I think that's the part where you want to be more than just a hockey manager or a baseball manager. You're a people manager, and you want to make sure that whatever got them into that situation, that's the start, but you can be the start of making their life better moving forward, and how can you put them in touch with the right resources to become better and stronger people.
Mo, you said something earlier about social media, and you'll hear something on there or see something, and hey, that's an interesting idea. And you guys, everybody knows who you guys are in St. Louis, whether you go to the cleaners or supermarket or whatever, and everybody gives you advice. When are you going to get rid of this guy? Or you ought to sign this guy. What's the best advice you got from a fan?
Oh, boy. I'd have to think about that. I mean, we hear so much. It's not something like I keep some like track of or file, but I mean, there's not a place I don't go without some level of someone weighing in to what I should or shouldn't be doing.
Whether
So
they're invited to weigh in or not.
And you know me well enough, Mike, that if my snark level is high that day, I may ask you what you would do, and knowing that I really don't care, but see how they answer it. Because a lot of times in our world, when we're making decisions, it's not as simple as left or right or wrong. It's, can we move a contract? Are there no trade language? It's the complexities of getting to what we need to do sometimes is hard. And so ultimately, the feedback I get from fans, I sometimes, it puts a smile on my face because at least I know they care.
And that's important, isn't it, Doug, that they do care, whether they may be off base or wrong. Once you move that out of the way, the fact that they thought enough to make a suggestion, you have to appreciate.
Certainly. And I think it's Marv Levy had the great quote, once you start listening to the fans, you'll become a fan if you're in management. But, I appreciate with the passion that they have. And one of the things that, I try and share with ownership or people that will listen is I understand, okay, let's move this player. But if we're doing it, we have to get better. Let's move this coach. If we're doing that, we have to get better. So who's the better replacement? The easiest thing is the first part. It's getting better, because ultimately everything we do is to get better. It's not to make us feel better. It's to get the organization better. And so you better have a plan when you make those decisions that you're getting better.
You guys pride yourselves on trying to be collected, calm. Have you ever been so to the point where you made an irrational decision, whether it's moving a player or doing something where somebody had to step in and call timeout and say, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this?
No. Mm-mm.
Not any of your lieutenants, anybody, or do you throw things off of them at that point and say?
No, I mean, I think like we're just a very strategic team. And again, I don't get that emotional on anything. I mean, obviously I've been involved in, negotiations that have come down and have not gone the way we had hoped, but it's not going to make us then go out and do something that we hadn't thought about or believe in. And so, for us, I guess I would describe our strategy as very methodical. And if it doesn't go the way we had hoped or what we wanted to see happen, it's we sort of move on to the next project. But, we've never done anything just because we were annoyed or in spite or reactionary.
Yeah, I would agree that we don't do the final decision because of that. But my emotion will get the best of me when I'm dealing with an agent. And
Which was my next question.
I can see. I always try and see their point of view. I understand it's a business; they have to maximize. But when you can't get them to see your point of view at all, you're trying to work different ways, and that's where the emotion might come in a little bit. Is where you see the value for the player here, and when I always look at the agents can't spend 3% of goodwill, so they want the absolute maximum amount of money. They don't care the lifestyle. They want 3% of money, not 3% of happiness. And so trying to get everyone to understand maybe what's best for the player, or that's through my glasses to them. I try and see it through their glasses to us also.
Has an agent ever pushed either of your buttons?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if I do have a temper, it can come out.
That's
there.
when we'll see it.
Yeah,
okay,
for sure. But even when you're thinking about like negotiating, the best strategy is always to remain calm, because if all of a sudden you're screaming at each other, you've probably annoyed each other so much that it's going to be harder to get to where you want to go. But there is sort of a saying that you always hear too in sort of the negotiating world: if you're both angry, you're probably at the right spot.
Yeah.
Right. But if one person's not angry, you've probably not pushed hard enough. And so that's always sort of an interesting way of thinking about it.
If everybody's just a little bit unhappy, you probably got a good deal.
It's a good deal, yeah, and everybody can walk away from it. Hey, who's the favorite player that you had that no longer plays in St. Louis?
For me, it's David Backes. I really enjoyed, when I got here, probably it was my first month, he had signed an offer sheet in Vancouver. We matched that, and there was a little, I don't want to say animosity, but there was a little frustration from people that had been here for a while. I didn't have it. I didn't know David Backes. It was just let's match it and let's move forward. He became our captain. I really appreciated the way that He handled himself at the arena. I appreciated the way he handled himself in the community. I thought as we were trying to get better, he was a leader of that. He understood the short and long term, and I wish we had won a championship with him as our captain. He's the one guy that I really appreciated what he brought here, and there's certainly guys here on our team now that I had that same appreciation for, but that wasn't the question.
John, what about you?
Well, I've been here 23 years, and along that journey, I've met a lot of guys that I've admired and liked. Certainly, Albert Pujols comes to mind, Jim Edmonds, Larry Walker. Probably the one guy that I was closest to was Scott Rowland. Always admired his approach and how he thought about the game. And then recently, Matt Holliday. I mean, all these guys were true pros. They knew how to go about the game. Young players respected them, looked up to them. They were all leaders in our clubhouse. And, fortunately for us, every one of those guys had a ring. I mean, it was truly a great career here in the city.
I'm going to throw another name in there, Carlos Beltran, because he followed Albert, which was a huge deal at that point. What did he mean to you? Because he gave you what you needed. He was an all-star twice. He helped get you to a World Series.
Yeah, see, now I hate the question because it's going to bring up a couple more names. But Carlos to me was one of those guys. I mean, he was a true pros pro, and came here and ended up going to the Yankees and continuing to play. Mm-hmm. But when we lost Albert, we needed someone to hit in the middle of the lineup, and he did that. And it was at a deal that was very palatable for us, or maybe a different way of saying it. It was great, and the type of player he was, how mature he was, how he helped younger players, he was special.
For you guys, you wouldn't be here without who? Who's the mentor? Who's the person that got you to where you're at right now?
Also, my father, not because of what he did in the work ethic that I saw from him. Back in the day, he was an official, as I told you, and a golf pro in the summer. He got up every morning at 6 o'clock.
Did you ever beat him?
At the end. He is 85.
He shot his age, and that's the only reason why.
Doug must be a very good player, apparently.
But, his work ethic and his demeanor is something that I always try and pull back on. And from inside the sport, it would be Bob Gainey. I started with Bob in 1990 and took over for him in Dallas, and still a very good friend, someone I talk to all the time on what's the right way to do things. So those would be the two people that influenced me the most.
Again, terrible question because I'm going to leave someone out. But obviously my parents, how they brought me up,
what
work
did your
ethic.
parents do?
My father worked for IBM, and my mother was basically a stay-at-home mother, but also did some work at a bank, local bank. So anyway, my parents were very influential on me, and I'm grateful for that. Obviously, Walt Jocketty and Bob Gebhardt had a big influence on my career, and finally, Bill DeWitt. I mean, when I look at where I am, what I do, everybody I just mentioned, had their fingerprints on me.
Give me a story about you guys when you were young guys in the business, not making a lot of money, that you look back and you even amuse yourself. Somebody gave me a great story about you the other day. I knew the story, but they reminded me of it. But you were a young guy and you did something that maybe you look back and you kind of chuckle about now.
Want me to go first? What do you think?
Yeah.
And I have no idea what you're thinking about, Mike.
How about the racetrack?
The racetrack. That's okay. That's a good story. Okay, I'll go with that one. So I was just starting out and making $0, and so Don Zimmer took me to the dog track, and he handed me $100 bill, and he goes, put it on like a 5.6 Quinella or something. I don't even know what that meant. And then he also gave me another 100 to do the same for him. And so me, being as smart as I am, I'm walking up to the window to make this bet, and I'm like, the probability of me winning is so low, I'm just going to pocket the 100. I made his bet. If the thing didn't hit, right? And you guys don't know Don Zimmer, but he's a little man who was just very energetic, very excitable. And he's like, give me the tickets, give me the tickets. And I'm like, pull out his ticket and I give it to him. He's like, where's yours? Where's yours? And I'm just like, oh, shrinking. and I can't actually say what he said to me because I then
you can't say that once on this show.
No,
you can't
cannot.
Even say it once.
And it kind of followed me, but he kind of called me the smart something college boy for the rest of my life. And but I did get to keep the 100.
There
So
you
I felt
go.
pretty good about that.
You parlayed it into something bigger. Doug, what about you?
Mine would be just my first year. We took the team to Russia, and this was back in 1990, so it wasn't like it is now. And we're at the restaurant. We had all our players and wives, and Bob Gainey said, "Well, you stay here and take the bill." And they left, and I said, "No problem." But then I realized I was in Russia. I had no idea where I was going. It took me about 3 hours to get back. I got back in. My wife was with the coach's wife. They were crying. They thought I was dead. I walked in and said, "What's everybody crying about?" They said, so that was the one thing I always look back at. And Bob Gainey and Bob Clark said, "Well, you're in your 20s. You'll figure this out." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know why everybody else was crying."
I thought you were going to say like your credit card bounced.
That's happened before,
Yes.
For sure. Hey, we're almost out of time. You guys obviously are having fun with what you do, and you're having a good time doing something that you walked into, you put the work into, and there are a lot of people who are listening to this, and they obviously want your teams to win. What's the one thing you'd like to say to fans who follow your team, if not both teams, that maybe if they probably don't understand? But if you can enlighten them on one thing about what you do and what the purpose of your teams are as far as success, what would it be?
Well, I would say the purpose that we want to have as the Blues is to make our fan base proud. And to do that, you have to have an unbelievable work ethic and put yourself in that position to succeed. And we work in windows, or I work in windows where you have a chance and then you have to retrench and then you have another chance. We went through a great window of great regular season teams that didn't get the job done. And I felt really bad because I know how bad this franchise is, or this city is dying for a championship team. But now we're entering a new window when some of our core players like Pietrangelo, Tarasenko, Schwartz, the new guys, O'Reilly, Shen, they're in that window. And what I want to do is have the same regular season success we had for 6 or 7 years, but put some championships behind that. Coming here, I've worked in 2 cities. I worked in Dallas. And I've worked here. We had the Cowboys to look up to, and now we have the Cardinals to look up to. And the Cardinals are a much different run franchise than the Cowboys, and one that I aspire to become more like, because they do it the right way and they do it with humble. They're humble about doing it. They're not boisterous in the city, but they're the big dogs, and we want to be like the big dogs.
Yeah, well, thank you for your kind words. My message is very comparable to that. It's you're trying to put a quality product out on that field. You understand that there are mistakes that happen, and you're trying to avoid those. But Doug and I probably get up every morning and go to bed every night thinking about the same thing. How do you get better? What can you do differently to get better? And it's almost like you're on a treadmill that never stops, because your mind never stops. You never take that time out. You're always trying to keep pushing. And when you're looking at a world that we work in, it's very competitive. There's always people that have an opinion on what you could be doing, how you should spend your money, where you should be investing. And to try to have enough confidence in what you're doing and why you're doing it is probably the hardest part of our job, because you can be second-guessed quite a bit, but having that confidence that you know what you're doing will work and you believe in it is something that we both try to achieve. And, there's no perfect recipe for success. If so, everybody would follow it and it wouldn't matter anymore. But, that's the challenge that what we're trying to do. And obviously for the Cardinals, I think, 2018 will be definitely earmarked the year of change, and hopefully it was a change for the better.
2 final ones, 2 quick ones. Favorite city to eat in? Think about that, and obviously we'll find out what city has a good wine. And also for you guys, if you had one sport to follow that's not hockey or golf, because we're going to take golf off the table with you, what's the one sport you'd like to take in more to just get away from what you're doing?
Okay, so favorite city to eat in. I mean, obviously, to me, going to New York, San Francisco, Chicago, all good. But, I mean, look, we never get shorted on eating at quality places. So that's never a problem. And in terms of sport that I follow, I mean, locally would be the Blues, because were the two teams. I don't spend a whole lot of time like watching the NFL anymore, so that's not something that I'm like locked in on a Sunday worrying about. I think the industry that is most intriguing to me, like if someone said, "Hey, I want you to try to run it," would be the NFL. Just because I think
they could use some help.
I just think the model of how they leverage the NCAA is very unique to me. We didn't get into sort of the differences between hockey and baseball, but
we can. Let's get into that for a second.
But we have over 300 minor league players in total, and managing that pipeline is so different than the NFL looking at the NCAA, and I just find that intriguing. I'm not sure I could find a way to leverage that any more successful than anyone else, but I just think that's a very interesting model.
Doug, what about you? Your favorite city, and what sport are you going to follow?
Well,
I got an idea.
When you talk about the best restaurants, the NHL actually stands for the Never Hungry League. So there's you can go to all these cities and find great places. And but I do love going to Chicago. I love the vibe of the downtown, and there's always some good food to be had there. The sport I would say that I'm getting into now that I really wasn't a fan of a lot was baseball, and not just because you're sitting here now, but maybe I'm getting a little bit older. I can sit down in front of the TV for a little bit longer and watch it, and actually going to some of the games. I was fortunate to go to the game last night. Unfortunately, the team didn't have the success that they've had, but they'll bounce back tonight. But my seats were very close to the dugout, and I was watching the relationship between the new manager and his coaches and the new manager and his players. And those are things that you talk about. You're always trying to get better. You're always trying to pick up little things. And I didn't go to the game to do that, but my mind took me to that as soon as I sat in those seats. And so so the Cardinals would be the team, but baseball in general, I've been fortunate enough. Actually, last year you set me up to see the Boston Cardinal game in Boston. Fabulous seats right behind. I could have called balls and strikes, so I knew what I was doing. So I'd say baseball is a sport that I'm becoming, and my kids are saying, "Wow, you never watched this before. What's going on?"
You're an empty nester now. You got to find something to do.
Time. That's right.
You talk about the NFL and how they've kind of leveraged the NCAA. It's amazing how the NCAA has different rules for the NFL and the NBA. But yet and still, if you use the word advisor for baseball or hockey, everybody's okay. You use that word in college basketball or college football, somebody's going on probation. How do you deal with the fact that you have that flexibility to basically recruit a player or basically get your hands on a kid at 17 or 18 years old compared to what we see with college basketball and college football?
Well, I would say we do get our hands on them. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing. I think when you get players at 22, 23, you're getting much closer to the finished product. So when you draft in the NFL, I don't know a lot about it. I'm not going to profess to be an expert, but you're drafting for guys that are going to help you today and probably 3 or 4 rounds. And usually the majority of the players that are on a roster are not drafted players. So there's such a wide variety of players you can choose from in that sport, not as much in our sport. But drafting at 17, 18, 19 is very difficult because just the maturation of the player physically, not only mentally, and then you put in the mental part of it and the background. So it's a little bit different. I'm always interested about the baseball one because you can draft a guy if he goes to college, you lose his rights. I never really understood that. It can happen in about 12 hours. But
yeah, and I've never understood the hockey version where you can draft a player and then hold the rights.
Yeah.
But like it is. Making sausage is always gross, right? And so that's why people never talk about it. And like in our business, we sign international players at 16. We start scouting them at 14. And the likelihood of success in that type of age bracket is so rare and so hard to make your bets on. And that's why I just feel like using like the NFL model would just be so much more intriguing because getting someone at 21 that you know is going to help you tomorrow seems like, okay, these are bets that seem like much more reasonable. And, unfortunately our business is not like that. And so we still have to play for the long view.
It's one of the things I like about baseball was I was told that when I was in in Dallas that when the international draft, you can't really tell the age until the person dies and you cut their leg off and count the rings.
I think you know what?
We're getting better at that,
yeah,
though. So you don't have to
but there was
eliminate the
a
leg.
point, Doug, where you know what? You count the teeth in his mouth and you could get an idea how old he was. Hey, gentlemen, this has been a blast. We did this a few years ago. All three of us have gotten to know each other even better. We've all grayed a little bit more, and I think the one thing we still share is the fact we love what we do, and we love to see our teams win. So I want to thank you guys for being part of this. Best of luck to you, Mo. We've got some baseball still to be played. Doug, I'm excited about your hockey team, and let's have some fun and have a few parades going up and down Market Street.
Well,
Sounds
thank you very
perfect.
much.
For Doug Armstrong of the St. Louis Blues and John Mozeliak of the St. Louis Cardinals, I'm Mike Claiborne. We thank you for listening with Live at Mike here on KMOX. Have a great evening, everyone.